All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're jumping straight into a true mastery challenge, specifically focusing on lesson 9. We're going to build a really powerful 12-word arsenal. And we aren't just rattling off definitions here. We're going to lock these words into your brain using clear visuals, relatable examples, and a completely fascinating historical case study. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's kick things off with a pretty heavy thought. With words, we govern men. That was said by Benjamin Disraeli, the famous 19th century British Prime Minister. And honestly, it's the perfect hook for us today, because it highlights the real stakes of mastering your vocabulary. Words aren't just letters on a page, right? They're tools. Tools of influence, precision, and understanding.
So, to avoid any cognitive overload, we're tackling Lesson 9 in chunks. Let's start with Essential Vocabulary, Part 1.
First up is vicinity. Basically, this just means the region near a place or a neighborhood. It's all about proximity. So, if you live in the vicinity of New York City, you're lucky enough to be right near some world-class museums. Or, say a crazy rainstorm hits only in your vicinity, that means your specific neighborhood got absolutely soaked while the rest of the town stayed dry.
Now, to measure the timeline of places like that, we use our next word, century, which literally means exactly 100 years. A great way to cement this one is with a historical anchor. George Washington, for example, lived in the 18th century. Our country is well over 2 centuries old. It's just a fundamental word for getting historical timelines and perspective.
Moving from logic over to emotion, we have rage. This word has a kind of fascinating dual meaning. It can mean violent anger, for sure, but it can also mean something that arouses intense but very brief enthusiasm, like a massive passing fad. Let's focus on that first meaning, though. Imagine someone smashing a valuable glass in a sudden fit of rage. It's just an uncontrollable, explosive emotion.
And how do we prove the stakes of those intense situations? Well, usually with a document. Something handwritten or printed that gives information or proof of a fact. The absolute key word there is proof. It's not just a random scrap of paper. Think of a tense courtroom. A newly discovered document could literally be the exact thing needed to prove a prisoner's innocence.
Once that proof is laid out, we can conclude, meaning to end, finish, or decide. It's just about bringing things to a close. A super relatable way to think about this is that awesome feeling of satisfaction you get at the end of the day. We're usually pretty happy when we finally conclude our work, right? Or, on a gloomier note, a dark day might conclude with a massive thunderstorm.
Wrapping up our first group, we have undeniable. If something is undeniable, it is not to be denied. It simply cannot be questioned. This brilliantly shows the power of a rock-solid fact. When a jury looks at all the irrefutable evidence, maybe an undeniable document, and they conclude that a suspect is guilty, well, that guilt becomes undeniably clear.
All right, we are halfway there. Let's keep that momentum going and jump right into Essential Vocabulary, Parts 2.
Think about how incredibly tough it is to resist eating a giant chocolate sundae when it's sitting right in front of you. To resist means to act against, strive against, or oppose. We tend to think of this in terms of epic, grand battles. But you know what? That internal struggle over dessert? Yeah, that's you trying to resist.
Now, if you do give in, you might worry that you lack willpower. To lack is to be entirely without something, or to just not have enough of it. It's an absence. For some practical advice, your daily diet absolutely should not lack fruits and vegetables. Or, professionally speaking, an amateur dancer might quickly realize they lack the polished touch of a pro. And if you happen to lack attention from someone, you might feel the sting of our next concept, to ignore, meaning to pay no attention to or disregard. It is an active choice to look the other way. Picture a family dynamic. It's super common for older siblings to feel ignored when their parents suddenly have to spend all their time with a demanding new baby.
Feeling ignored can actually sometimes lead to a challenge, which we're defining here as a call to a fight. This brings incredibly high stakes. To lock this in, just look at early American history. One of the most famous examples of this word in action is when Aaron Burr challenged Alexander Hamilton to a fateful duel. It's a direct, unavoidable confrontation.
Sometimes those challenges, or representations, happen on a miniature scale. That simply means represented on a small scale, like a perfect replica just shrunken down. Think of a kid asking for a miniature sports car for his birthday, or maybe someone buying a miniature, beautifully carved chess set just because a full-sized one is way too bulky. And finally, word number 12, source. This is the place from which something comes or is obtained. Whether it's a physical origin or an intellectual one, it's the exact same concept. For instance, any dedicated college student knows they need a highly valid source of information for their final report. A basic, outdated textbook just isn't going to cut it.
Okay, now for the guitar's story. We are going to take our newly minted 12-word arsenal and deploy it directly into a really fascinating historical case study.
So, looking at the early chronology of one of the oldest instruments known to man, it probably originated in the vicinity of China. Then, its written history kicks off in Spain during the 13th century. By 1500, the guitar had become wildly popular across Italy, France, and Spain. Notice how seamlessly our new words, vicinity and century, help set the scene and the timeline right off the bat?
And look at how these facts come alive with our vocabulary. A French document from back then actually concludes that a ton of people were playing it. In fact, it was so popular that Antonio Stradivarius, the undeniable king of violin makers, he simply could not resist creating a variety of guitars himself. Because of all this widespread passion, there was certainly no lack of music written for the instrument by composers like Haydn and Schubert.
But the story gets even better. When the great Ludwig van Beethoven was asked to compose music for the guitar, he initially refused. Actually, he went into a literal rage. But Beethoven being Beethoven, he eventually couldn't ignore the challenge. He ended up writing for it, and his perspective totally flipped. He famously called the guitar a miniature orchestra, and through the centuries, it's remained an incredible source of music for millions of people.
Now, vocabulary isn't just rote memorization. It's about extracting meaning. Which brings us to the final challenge.
Take a look at this incredibly quirky cartoon straight from our Lesson 9 source material. We've got a guy chilling inside a very peculiar, almost double-ended car, looking totally calm. But meanwhile, standing right there on the hood is another man, significantly smaller in scale, just shaking his fist in what looks like a violent fit of anger.
So here is my final question for you to close out this explainer. Out of the 12 essential words we just mastered together, which word or words are perfectly suggested by this completely bizarre picture? Is it a display of rage? Is it the miniature size of that angry man? Take a second, map these words onto what you see, and really lock them in. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep observing, keep questioning, and I will catch you next time.